She isn't on the ledger, Mr. Velrick. That makes her a Category 2 occupancy violation. That's what Eloise Tarmond, president of the Wickerdale Edge HOA, said as she stood beside my wife's hospital bed, holding my newborn daughter like she'd just seized contraband from a checkpoint. She wore that same bone-colored blazer she paraded at every board meeting, only this time her ID badge, Community Regulatory Executive, was clipped to a crimson lanyard that didn't belong to her. She never earned that lanyard. I did. I didn't speak as I stepped through the sealed emergency access corridor. The door hissed shut behind me, 8 seconds from alert to entry. It would have been 7 if the biometric pad hadn't glitched. But then again, I helped write the failover protocol for this wing's lockdown system. Before Wickerdale, before the HOA, before everything else. Subscribe now if you believe no HOA should have access to your child's birth. Because what this woman did next might be the most invasive thing you've ever seen. I'm filing a preliminary review with the Charter Enforcement Committee, she continued, rocking the baby like some bureaucratic saint. Clause 12, this eyes. A specifies all permanent biological additions must be approved prior to residential integration. I didn't let myself flinch. Put her down, she arched a brow. She'll be returned once the board has reviewed your request for retention. My name is Thorne Velrick. I spent 17 years as a Navy SEAL, logistics and containment specialist. I don't bluff, I don't threaten, I just act when it matters. And right now, this woman had no idea that every second she held my daughter was being logged by a secured hospital AI. I built those protocols after a mass casualty event in Kandahar. Back then, we called it compassion security. Today, it's the thing that's going to tear her world apart. This child isn't just my daughter, she's the second heartbeat we weren't supposed to have. Our first pregnancy ended in emergency surgery at 21 weeks. Risa nearly didn't make it. After that, I embedded a rapid response override into every hospital I consulted for. It was selfish. It was tactical. It was love. This wasn't about a baby violating some line item clause in a suburban charter. This was about a woman with too much power, using a tragedy she didn't understand to enforce rules she twisted. The crimson lanyard Eloise wore was mine, issued by Fairfax Medical Center's Tactical Responder Program, the same one that notified me when Rice's vitals spiked during active labor. I arrived before the security alert even registered, but Eloise had already used her borrowed access from Julia Malkin, an HOA sympathetic admin, to enter the wing, and then she took my daughter. My wife was still hooked to post-op IVs when I walked in. Her lips were dry, her eyes wide. She couldn't speak, but she didn't need to. Eloise smiled at her. That was her second mistake. The first, thinking I was just a neighbor. Let me make this clear. I don't care how many citations she writes, how many compliance emails she sends, or how many phrases she underlines in an outdated HOA charter. My daughter's not a violation. She's a survivor. Just like her mother, just like me. You think a swing set ban is outrageous. Try watching an HOA president trespass into a private medical recovery suite and seize a medically fragile newborn because the child wasn't pre-cleared by board vote. The hospital will tell you she didn't steal the baby. They'll call it an administrative confusion, a moment of miscommunication. They're wrong. I have time-coded video. I have access logs from the restricted wing. I have personnel statements. And I have something better. Witnesses who are done being silent. This story isn't about revenge. It's about exposure. Because when someone weaponizes bureaucracy to touch your child and thinks they'll walk away clean, you don't just stop them, you erase their authority. Eloise didn't leave the hospital room right away. She set my daughter down like she was placing a file on a desk, not a living human being who'd been alive for less than 30 minutes. She adjusted her blazer, straightened the badge clipped to the crimson lanyard she had no right to wear, and turned to Risa with a gentle, patronizing nod. Then she walked out without saying another word. The door hissed closed behind her. For a moment, all I could hear was the soft, irregular beep of the heart monitor and my daughter's shallow breathing. Risa's hand trembled as she reached toward the bassinet. She didn't speak. Her lips were pale and cracked. I placed the child in her arms, and Risa broke into a silent, breathless sob. It was the only time I've ever looked away. That night, I sat on the edge of our bed in Wickerdale Edge, cradling the same crimson lanyard Eloise had taken. I'd gotten it reissued before we left the hospital, requested a replacement, and had them run a full access audit. They gave me more than I asked for. The time-stamped access logs didn't lie. Eloise's entry credentials had been manually overridden using admin access tied to Julia Malkin's ID. Julia had lived 4 houses down from us for nearly 2 years. She was quiet, kept to herself, but everyone knew she was one of Eloise's people. Lawn always regulation length. HOA flags posted on every holiday, even the obscure ones. I didn't think much of her before. Now I saw the mechanism behind the curtain. Wickerdale had been strange from the beginning. When we moved in 9 months ago, we'd been told the residency census was part of their sustainability initiative, tracking occupancy to prevent overcrowding, light pollution, ecological strain. I didn't care. I wasn't here for neighborhood cookouts. We needed clean air, a quiet place, somewhere stable after everything we'd lost. But the rules kept changing. 3 months in, we got cited for temporary over-occupancy after Rice's sister stayed the weekend. Then again, for non-compliant visitor transportation, when my father dropped off an oxygen concentrator we weren't supposed to own without board registration. We learned quickly that nothing happened in Wickerdale without a record, a signature, and someone reporting you first. I didn't fight then. We needed the stability. Now, I see what it was all for. Wickerdale isn't just over-regulated. It's a control system designed to filter families, not support them, designed to enforce image, not safety. The violation letters are only the beginning. Behind every line of the charter, there's interpretation, and Eloise Tarmond is the interpreter. I didn't sleep that night. I walked the property at 2:15 a.m., past our mailbox, down to the end of Juniper Lane, where the streetlights cut off. From there, I could see the clubhouse where board meetings happened every second Thursday. The lights were still on inside. 2 silhouettes moved behind the blinds. One was tall and rigid. The other moved with small, nervous energy. Probably Julia, probably planning their next move. The next morning, the envelope was waiting for us. HOA letterhead, gold ink, titled, Notice of Unauthorized Residential Expansion, Compliance Review Initiated. They had the nerve to list my daughter's name, her name, as if she were some shed or patio umbrella that hadn't been pre-approved. Clause 12A was cited, of course. Any permanent biological addition to the household unit must be submitted for occupancy compliance no less than 30 days prior to integration. They'd time-stamped the violation notice before my daughter was even born. I laid the letter flat on the kitchen table. Riza was upstairs resting. The baby was finally asleep. I stared at the signature line, not Eloise's, another board member, a new name, which meant they were coordinating already. I scanned the QR code on the bottom of the letter. It led to a scheduled compliance hearing, just 3 days away. Location, Wickerdale Community Event Hall. Time, 9 a.m. They wanted to make this official. They wanted to record it, vote on it, archive it, and if I didn't show, automatic fine, continued violation, possible lien, eviction after second non-compliance. I looked out the window toward our driveway. The HOA camera at the end of the block turned slightly, watching. Wickerdale wanted to make an example out of us. I had no intention of letting them, but not yet. Not until I understood exactly what kind of machine I was dealing with. I didn't go straight to the HOA office. That's what they expected. A confrontation, a scene, something they could twist into a narrative of aggression. Instead, I went back to the hospital. Riza needed a follow-up check anyway, and I needed something more valuable than another shouting match. Proof. The same morning sun. That looked clean in Wickerdale always seemed filtered through fog here, like the world outside the gates was a different temperature. The staff at Fairfax Medical didn't look me in the eye when I asked for the access audit again. Julia's name was gone from the visitor log, scrubbed. Someone had cleaned the trail overnight. At the chapel entrance, I found Sister Corvell Nave kneeling in the front pew, head bowed, her hands pressed so tight they shook. She wasn't praying, she was thinking. I recognized the posture. Soldiers do it after a mission goes wrong. They replay it frame by frame. When she noticed me, she didn't flinch. "You're the father," she said quietly. "The one from Wickerdale Edge." That tone, half pity, half fear, told me everything. She'd heard the story already, probably straight from Eloise's mouth. "I'm trying to understand how she even got in," I said. Sister Corvell looked toward the stained glass window before answering. "She said she had clearance. Something about community emergency access coordination. The staff believed her. I didn't. Her voice broke on the last word. I let the silence stretch. She wasn't lying. Her discomfort was too visible, the kind of unease that only comes from witnessing something that shouldn't have happened, and realizing your own inaction helped it along. She told the nurses your wife had submitted an HOA residency waiver, she continued, voice trembling. Said the child's citizenship documentation was pending community verification. It sounded official. They didn't question it. There it was, the signature Eloise touch, language that sounded bureaucratic enough to bypass instinct, the kind of manipulation that didn't need violence to feel like an assault. Did she show paperwork? I asked. Sister Corvell nodded. A laminated form with seals I didn't recognize. I told her it didn't belong in a hospital. She told me everything belongs to Wickerdale, sister. Then she smiled. I didn't realize how hard my hands were gripping the pew until I heard the wood creak. Corvell lowered her eyes. I should have stopped her. I looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't complicit. She was trapped, probably on Wickerdale's mailing lists, probably invited to their quarterly luncheons. The kind of resident who thought neutrality kept her safe. Don't blame yourself, I said. Eloise counts on people freezing. She swallowed hard. Mr. Velrick, she's not done. I overheard a call in the corridor this morning. She was talking to someone named Malkin. They're rewriting Clause 12A, adding new language about postnatal residency assessments. If that passes, every newborn in Wickerdale will need board validation. I didn't answer right away. I'd spent years studying patterns of control, how systems evolve to justify power grabs. What she was describing wasn't random. It was structural. Would you testify? I asked finally. Her face paled. Against her? Yes. She hesitated. If it's about truth, yes. If it's about politics, no. Then make it about truth, I said. You saw what happened. You know she impersonated authority. That's not policy. That's crime. The chapel light shifted through the window, turning the floor amber. For a second, I thought she'd walk away. Instead, she reached into her coat and handed me a folded slip of paper. It's the internal incident log from that night. I made a copy before they purged it. It's not official anymore, but it proves she accessed the restricted wing without clearance. I took it carefully. The timestamp matched my own data by the second. Eloise had been inside for 4 minutes and 23 seconds before I arrived. That was all it would take to turn an intrusion into an abduction. Sister Corvell's voice softened. You're not the only one she's frightened. Half the staff are afraid of her husband's law firm. They handle Wickerdale's legal shield. I pocketed the slip. Then I'll handle him too. When I stepped out of the chapel, the world felt sharper, edges in high relief. Cars moved in slow motion outside. A gust of cold air slid down the corridor, and I realized for the first time that I wasn't angry. I was precise. Back at the hospital parking lot, I saw a black sedan idling near the exit. HOA plates, someone watching. Good. Let them. If Wickerdale wanted a record of this moment, I'd make sure they got one worth archiving. The letter wasn't just a violation, it was a declaration. On Wickerdale Edge letterhead, stamped with the HOA's embossed gold seal, the top line read, Initiation of Occupancy Review. Permanent edition, not previously filed. They weren't backing down. They were escalating. I unfolded the paper again while standing in the community clubhouse foyer. The stone tile floor was slick with fresh wax, the kind they paid for with the same fines they squeezed from residents who left their porch lights on past 10 p.m. A smiling portrait of Eloise hung above the announcement board, flanked by 2 American flags. Her title underneath, President, Wickerdale Heritage Oversight Board. I read the first paragraph again, not because I didn't understand it, but because it read like a dare. The HOA has determined that an unregistered biological occupant has been introduced into Lot 47. The board will conduct a preliminary evaluation of said occupant's compliance with established environmental and population standards. Non-attendance constitutes waiver of appeal rights. Failure to register said occupant may result in ongoing violation status, lien placement, and mandatory relocation proceedings. They had called my daughter an occupant. They had scheduled her fate for a 15-minute hearing slot. And if we didn't appear, automatic default. I looked up and saw Dennis Harbo, the board's compliance officer, lingering near the copy machine. He held a fresh stack of envelopes. The top one bore the name of another resident, Carla Stem, Lot 12. He froze when our eyes met. Then he nodded like a man who didn't want a conversation. I walked over anyway. "Is this your signature?" I asked, holding out the letter. The name at the bottom was his. Dennis didn't answer. His hands tensed around the envelopes. "You should take this up at the hearing." "I will, but I'm taking it up now too." He shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Thorne, this wasn't personal. It's policy. You know how Eloise is." "That's the problem. I know exactly how she is." I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to threaten him. People like Dennis folded long before a threat. They weren't cowards. They were survivalists. He wasn't protecting Eloise. He was protecting himself from whatever he thought would happen if he didn't sign. "She's already filed paperwork with the Office of Environmental Zoning," Dennis said quietly. "Claims your household is over ecological limit." "She's counting a 6-pound infant as a carbon offense?" He winced. "She's using the Charter's eco-integration clause. It lets her cite biological additions as stressors to neighborhood sustainability. It's never been enforced before, because no one else had been psychotic enough to write a violation against a newborn." I walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. Outside, the air was heavier than usual, the kind of mid-Atlantic humidity that stuck behind your teeth. I passed a row of electric golf carts. The fleet Wickerdale offered to sustainability-compliant residents to cut down vehicle emissions. One of them had a license plate frame that read, "Vote Tarmond again." It wasn't just about fines. It was about power, control, normalization. The same tactics I'd seen insurgent groups use in failed states, only this time, dressed up in neighborhood logos and potted plants. Eloise wasn't some rogue tyrant. She was a systems thinker, and her system was airtight, but not impenetrable. I stopped at the edge of our property and looked toward our mailbox. The HOA's external camera box hung from the light pole, angled down toward the front walk. Inside that unit was a flash memory chip that updated every 72 hours via encrypted cloud sync. I'd been watching it rotate since we moved in. Back then, I'd chalked it up to standard overreach. Annoying, but tolerable. Now I understood. They weren't watching for safety. They were archiving compliance, documenting deviation. I went inside and laid the letter on the kitchen counter. Risa was upstairs, asleep with the baby. I stared at the kitchen monitor displaying our front door cam feed. The HOA sensors across the street blinked in perfect rhythm. Red, pause, red, pause. Then I opened my laptop. I didn't need to hack the HOA's system. That would come later. First, I downloaded the charter, all of it. I printed Clause 12A and highlighted every term that wasn't legally defined. Biological addition, occupancy capacity, sustainability threshold. Vague language was the sharpest blade in Eloise's arsenal. If I couldn't dull it, I'd expose it. She wanted a hearing, she'd get one. But not the kind she controlled. I didn't sleep the night before the hearing. Instead, I stayed up tracing the digital footprints that Eloise and Julia left behind. There was no sense trying to confront them through HOA channels. That route was theirs, rigged with circular clauses, echo chambers, and signatures that only validated their own authority. But systems always leave trails, especially ones that think they're untouchable. At 3:07 a.m., I logged into the hospital's vendor access backend using credentials from my old consulting days. My work on containment architecture had included a module for biometric override protocols, the same protocols Fairfax Medical had purchased before I ever moved to Wickerdale. I wasn't breaking in. I was verifying what should have already been flagged. The access logs from the night of the incident were there, time-stamped, clean on the surface. But something was wrong. Eloise's name didn't show at all. Only Julia's login, triggered from a workstation registered to Station 6A Check-In Admin. That workstation wasn't located near the maternity wing. It sat 3 floors down in the administrative records office. And the time Julia's access pinged, 17 minutes before Eloise entered the wing. I cross-referenced the RFID badge scans. Eloise had no badge of her own, but Julia's ID was used twice, once on Station 6A and once at the secure maternity door. Someone had loaned credentials and overridden the identity safeguard. That alone was a HIPAA-level violation. But I wasn't finished. I tunneled into the access control database using a federated server override, still registered under a dormant federal contract I'd helped write. It shouldn't have worked, but someone had failed to update the revocation lists. There it was. Julia had manually inserted a temporary guest profile for Eloise. She listed her as a municipal community liaison, emergency verification clearance. There's no such designation in any Virginia statute. It was made up, a term that sounded just official enough to bluff under pressure, and it worked, because people like Eloise don't rely on laws. They rely on the fear of being wrong. I screen captured everything: the login history, the falsified credential entry, the badge duplications, the time-stamped footage from the corridor that backed up every step. I saved it all in a secure cloud drive under a legal witness share protocol. Then I printed the critical frames and slipped them into a folder labeled HOA, Violation Appeal Packet. I knew she wouldn't see it coming. She thought she still had control. Let her. Let her think I was walking into a trap. Let her believe I'd stand there with folded hands while she recited bylaws written in her own voice. Let her believe we were still playing her game. The next morning, I dressed in the same uniform I wore when I testified before congressional committees. Gray suit, black tie, polished shoes. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, because I knew exactly what fear looked like in someone like Eloise. Fear didn't come when you shouted. It came when you looked like the investigation she didn't see coming. I drove to the Wickerdale event hall 10 minutes early. The room was already set, folded chairs in 3 neat rows, board members seated at a long table beneath the HOA seal. Eloise sat in the center, her hair tied back in a severe bun, a binder open in front of her. Julia wasn't there. "Mr. Velrick," Eloise said, nodding without smiling, "you've elected to attend in person. Not required, but appreciated." I didn't respond. I took my seat at the lone table set for petitioners. It was staged like a courtroom, but the rules were theirs. For now. Eloise adjusted her glasses. "This review will determine whether your recent addition to Lot 47 complies with Wickerdale's sustainability thresholds, per Clause 12A. Do you have any documentation to present?" I reached into my folder and placed one image face up on the table. It was a freeze frame of her, entering the hospital corridor, the timestamp burned into the corner. Her hand hesitated over her pen. "There'll be time for procedural posturing later," she said, voice tight. "Let's keep today focused." "Oh, we will," I said calmly. "I'm here for truth, not theatrics." But as I looked around the room, at the residents watching from the back, at Dennis Harbaugh avoiding my eyes, I realized something else. They weren't here to punish me. They were here to see if anyone could finally touch her. Risa didn't want me to go back to the hearing room alone, but I needed to. She was still healing, and our daughter had developed a soft wheeze the night before. Not enough for the ER, but enough to keep her eyes locked on the monitor all night, chest rising and falling like a fragile metronome. I left at dawn carrying 2 things: the packet of surveillance evidence I hadn't shown yet, and the carbon copy of the incident log Sister Corvell had slipped me beneath the chapel lights. The hearing was adjourned before I'd even had the chance to present. Eloise had called it a procedural continuation. No verdict, no vote, just more control. She'd looked calm, but I saw the edge in her voice. The freeze frame had shaken her. She wasn't delaying to buy time. She was recalibrating, and I knew what was coming next. At 11:24 a.m., a letter was posted on our digital compliance portal. It wasn't a direct violation notice. That would have been too obvious. It was subtler. Something called an environmental burden assessment notice. It stated that our home's occupancy profile had shifted significantly and without prior coordination, and the HOA board would require on-site reevaluation of environmental harmony metrics. They'd scheduled the visit for the following morning. A wellness inspection, Eloise called it in the attached message. I didn't need to guess what that meant. She was going to walk into my house, with forms, with witnesses, with a smile. And this time, she'd do it all by the book, hers. I read the notice 3 times, then forwarded it to a contact I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. Her name was Aileen Voss, senior investigator at the Virginia Office of Civil Enforcement. We'd crossed paths during a legal review of unethical residential surveillance programs spun off from a military contractor. I knew she wouldn't ignore this. Then I called Fairfax Medical Center. The nurse supervisor was terse at first. She remembered my name. That was enough to get me passed to the floor administrator, an aging man named Darrell, who didn't sound thrilled to be talking to me. "I need to know if the hospital has officially responded to the credential breach," I said. "We were advised to handle it internally," he replied. "The staffer responsible is under review." "And the patient access violation?" Ms. Tarman presented a plausible designation. "We didn't validate it at the time. Our fault. We're reviewing policy." She fabricated a government title. "You understand that's impersonation." A long pause. "I'm not authorized to say more, but you might want to speak with Sister Nave. I believe she filed something separate, a formal grievance." I didn't ask how he knew. That was enough. I hung up and pulled the baby monitor into view. My daughter's chest rose again, slower this time, but steady. Rice's voice came through the speaker, soft and cracked from lack of sleep. "She's okay," she whispered. "Just a little fluid." I breathed out, shoulders loosening for the first time in hours. But then the front gate sensor pinged. A golf cart was approaching. Wickerdale issued. A passenger sat in the back, clipboard in hand. Too early for the inspection. I stepped onto the porch before they rang the bell. The man who climbed out wasn't from the HOA. His ID tag read, County Office of Environmental Health. And behind him, in the passenger seat, Eloise. She smiled like this was a garden tour. "Mr. Velrick," she said, unfolding a paper with the county seal. "We've decided to accelerate the evaluation. Given the medical variables in your household, it's in everyone's best interest." I looked at the inspector, mid-30s, new to the job. He wouldn't know her. Wouldn't know she likely drafted the request herself and made it look like it came from the board. "I'll allow it," I said. "But not today." The inspector hesitated. "We're just here. You're here without notice, without consent, and without a signed order. That means you're here under implied invitation." I looked at Eloise. "I'm not inviting you." Her smile thinned. "We'll be back," she said. "I'm counting on it. Because when they came next time, I'd have more than evidence. I'd have someone ready to speak. Sister Corvell didn't meet me at the chapel this time. She waited in the rear parking lot, behind the service wing, where delivery trucks unloaded medical linens and sealed medication crates. Her hair was tucked under a plain wool cap, and her white coat was buttoned to the throat. She looked smaller out here, like the moment she'd stepped outside Wickerdale's grip, she'd lost some invisible weight she'd carried too long. "I submitted the statement," she said as I approached. "Not to the hospital board. Higher." "Where?" "Office of Civil Enforcement." They sent me a formal intake reply, asked for the copy of the incident log and my direct recollection. I gave them both. I exhaled slowly, relief cutting through the coiled tension behind my ribs. "I also attached something else," she added, reaching into her coat. "Security footage from my office hallway. I wasn't supposed to have access to it, but the technician forgot to remove the export permissions when they did the system audit last year." She handed me a USB drive. "It's grainy, but you'll see her walk in, alone, no escort, no sign-in. That was the same morning. No one challenged her." I took it, fingers closing over the cold plastic. "You sure you're ready for what comes next?" "No," she said plainly. "But I'm more afraid of staying quiet." That was all she needed to say. By the time I returned home, the HOA van was already circling the cul-de-sac. Risa saw it too, from the upstairs nursery. Her text came in one word: again. They weren't just preparing another visit. They were conditioning us. Pushing the boundary, watching our reaction, logging the data. But they hadn't seen the shift coming. That night, I drafted the formal complaint using all the documentation I'd gathered. Julia's credential misuse, the fabricated municipal title, the falsified guest profile, Sister Corvell's signed witness statement, time stamped, the hallway footage. Then I added one more thing, the inspection demand itself. I'd been careful not to respond to the last HOA notice. The clause they cited included a procedural flaw. It was borrowed from a zoning regulation used for pre-construction review, not for live occupancy enforcement. Legally, it couldn't be applied retroactively to an already inhabited dwelling, but that wouldn't matter if no one challenged it. I sent the packet with certified tracking to 3 places: the Office of Civil Enforcement, the State Licensing Division, and, quietly, to a regional journalist I'd worked with years ago during a veteran, Housing scandal. I didn't need to win overnight. I just needed to light the fuse. The next morning, Risa called me to the living room. The screen was frozen on the security feed. The HOA van was parked again, this time 2 houses down. The same inspector from before stood outside, speaking to our neighbor. And then I saw her. Carla Stem. Lot 12. Widowed last year. Her porch had been tagged with a minor infraction sticker for unsanctioned railing additions 2 months ago. She looked exhausted as she leaned against her screen door. Her hand rested on the edge like she needed it to stay upright. "I don't think this is about us anymore," Risa said, her voice thin. "It never was," I replied. Later that afternoon, a sealed envelope arrived via registered courier. The return address was the Office of Civil Enforcement. I opened it with surgical calm. Inside was a formal acknowledgement of complaint intake, a request for interview dates, and a notation. Expedited review approved under Title 15.17, Emergency Administrative Intrusion Investigation. They were moving fast, faster than I expected. That meant one of 2 things. Either Sister Corvell's statement hit harder than we realized, or we weren't the only complaint sitting on their desk. I stepped outside and walked to the end of our driveway. For the first time in days, the HOA camera across the street didn't turn toward me, but I looked into it anyway. Let them see me. The game had changed. I spent the next 2 days doing what Eloise never expected. I didn't fight her directly. I didn't respond to her latest follow-up compliance survey. I didn't send angry emails. I didn't request a hearing. Instead, I went quiet. That's what unnerves people like her the most. While she doubled down on paperwork and control, I built something else. A clean, bulletproof counterstrike using the only tools she couldn't twist. Chain of custody documentation, verified credentials, and procedural law. The first thing I did was activate legal record logging on every HOA interaction. I submitted a data transparency request under the Fair Administrative Practices Act, forcing the board to provide a complete archive of any actions, votes, or correspondence mentioning my name, my address, or unregistered occupants. That request alone bought me leverage. They had 72 hours to comply. If they didn't, it wouldn't just be non-compliance. It would be an obstruction of civil disclosure under state code. But I wasn't done. I contacted Aileen Voss, the civil enforcement investigator Sister Corvell had sent her report to. I gave her everything: my hospital access logs, the hallway footage, Julia Malkin's credential use timeline, and Eloise's forged title entry. When we got on the phone, she asked only one question before proceeding. "Are you willing to go on record as a material complainant?" "Yes," I said. "But I'm not just asking you to investigate. I'm asking you to end it." There was silence on the line, then a click, then typing. "Then let's begin," she said. We scheduled an official intake deposition for 2 days later. She sent a list of items she needed preserved: the original violation letters, unaltered security camera data, timestamps of all HOA portal access. I had all of it, because I'd been preparing from the moment Eloise touched my daughter. I didn't stop there. That night, I opened the Wickerdale Covenant Charter PDF and spent 6 hours parsing it line by line, not looking for weaknesses, looking for inconsistencies. I found one in Clause 9b, the section outlining emergency access protocols for board members. It referenced a defunct county ordinance repealed 2 years ago. That meant the entire clause, used to justify Eloise's so-called hospital authority, was built on a voided statute. Legally, that made her unauthorized entry not just unethical, it made it criminal. I documented everything, annotated the charter, highlighted the conflict, cross-referenced the ordinance change, and printed the state bulletin that proved it. Then, I saved the packet under a new file name, Tarmon Breach, Final Brief. The next morning, I got the call, not from Aileen, from someone else. "I'm with Fairfax Medical's internal risk team," the woman said. "We're following up on an incident involving one of our admin staff, Julia Malkin." I waited. "She's been placed on administrative leave pending a licensing board review. Your name came up as part of a HIPAA breach investigation. We're aware of your formal complaint." So, it had begun. One domino down. I didn't tell Risa everything. She was already exhausted from the baby's irregular sleep cycles, but I showed her the letter from civil enforcement, the one requesting a sworn deposition. I wanted her to know we weren't being gaslit. We weren't alone. She nodded once, eyes rimmed with fatigue. I never wanted to live in a place where neighbors had to armor up like this. You didn't, I said. We just didn't know we'd moved into one, pretending not to be at war. That evening, I sat outside with a copy of every violation we'd ever received since moving into Wickerdale, each one printed in gold-trimmed HOA paper, 8 in total. Every one of them used as justification for a broader case against our non-compliance history. But now they served a different purpose. They were evidence, pattern, intent. Eloise wasn't just abusing power, she was manufacturing it. She'd turned violations into leverage, and leverage into control. But soon, every thread she pulled would snap back in her face. Because I wasn't just building a defense anymore, I was building a case. The day before the deposition, I walked the perimeter of our lot in silence. The wind had shifted again, carrying that sterile, overly chlorinated scent Wickerdale pumped into the artificial fountain near the community gate. It always reminded me of the hospital corridors, places that looked clean but hid everything underneath. That morning, a notice had been slid into our mailbox without a stamp. Wickerdale Heritage Oversight Board. Immediate compliance review. Adjustment. Pre-hearing conference, mandatory attendance required. It wasn't signed, no envelope, just folded and left like a warning nailed to a door in the old world. But they were too late, because while Eloise was setting traps in meetings and boardrooms, I'd already begun the part she couldn't see, the quiet tightening of a rope she didn't know was around her neck. At 2 p.m., I met with Aileen Voss in a satellite government office 30 minutes outside of Wickerdale. Neutral ground, no HOA ties. She didn't offer small talk, and I didn't ask for any. Her laptop was open, timestamp running, recorder light blinking. Full name? Thorne Velrick? Occupation? Former Navy SEAL, now contractor for emergency access and security compliance consulting. She tapped. Do you affirm the following is accurate and given under the penalty of perjury? I do. It took 2 hours to walk her through everything. The timeline, the hospital access logs, Julia's credential misuse, Eloise's forged municipal liaison title, the hallway footage from Sister Corvell, the charter language that referenced a dead county ordinance. By the end, she had over 200 pages of documentation and 6 separate code violations tagged for escalation under state review. But it was her reaction that told me we'd crossed the threshold. This isn't just internal abuse, she said finally. It's architectural coercion. They've built a framework to hide power inside routine language. Yes, I said, and if they're allowed to redefine children as compliance threats, this isn't just about us. It's precedent. She closed her laptop. We'll need a public confrontation, something traceable, recorded. Once we trigger regulatory authority, they'll either fold or double down. We need them on record choosing. They will, I said. Eloise doesn't retreat, she expands. That night, I sent out 3 letters, not to agencies, not to press, to neighbors, to Lot at 12, Carla Stem, whose porch had been tagged after her husband passed, to Lot 19, Wallace Crin, who'd been fined twice for flying a service flag a few inches too low, and to Lot 8, the Thramers, whose autistic son had been written up for non-compliant auditory disruption during a meltdown. I didn't ask for outrage, I asked for time. Just show up to the next board meeting. Just listen. Just bring your phones. That's all. Because now, it wasn't just about a newborn. It was about control sold under the banner of harmony. About power hidden inside language no one had ever questioned, until now. The next morning, I installed a portable hard drive under our mailbox housing, sealed in a waterproof case with magnetized clips. The mailbox post itself was metal, grounded and powered. Technically illegal for wiring, but grandfathered in under the neighborhood's original infrastructure design. It was the perfect hidden node. Inside the drive, a full mirrored copy of the HOA portal, every recorded notice, and time-stamped photos of every HOA vehicle that had stopped in front of our house. It wasn't paranoia. It was future-proofing. I wanted them to know that, even if I disappeared, the story wouldn't. By sunset, another unmarked envelope appeared at our door. But this time, it wasn't a threat. It was a copy of our original HOA lease agreement. Anonymous sender. No note. I scanned it line by line until I saw it, buried in a clause labeled Civic Obligations Waiver, a line that read, In the event of any dispute involving medical privacy, the HOA shall defer to municipal, not board, authority. Rice's name had never been added to the ledger, but mine had, and that clause wasn't just buried, it was binding. They'd violated their own foundation. The room was packed, more than I expected, honestly. Wickerdale board meetings usually drew 10 people at most. 3 loyalists, a couple of confused retirees, and the rest just there for coffee and updates on landscaping schedules. But not tonight. Tonight, chairs scraped against the walls. People stood in the aisles, some brought notepads, others just folded their arms and watched. I stood at the back, unnoticed for now. The board table was already lined with the usual suspects: Dennis Harbaugh, twitching beside the projector, Jillian Poe, silent and blank-eyed, 2 new faces I didn't recognize, recent additions, probably tapped to support Eloise's transparency reforms. And there she was, at the center. Eloise Tarmond, white blazer, HOA pin gleaming, her binder open, posture upright, unshaken. If anything, she looked pleased. "I want to thank everyone for coming," she began, voice steady. "Tonight's agenda will be brief but critical. We're addressing recent questions surrounding Clause 12A and ensuring that our community understands the importance of maintaining Wickerdale's occupancy integrity." She clicked a remote. A slide appeared on the projector. Demographic stability in HOA residential environments, a heritage priority. I almost laughed. She'd turned her targeting of my daughter into a slideshow. "As many of you know," she continued, "there was a procedural misunderstanding during a recent resident's hospital visit. The board regrets any miscommunications that may have occurred, but let me be clear. Our policies exist to ensure harmony, predictability, and ecological responsibility." Murmurs rippled through the back row. Carla Stem was here, so was Wallace Crin, the Thramers, and others I hadn't expected, neighbors who usually stayed out of everything. Eloise pressed on. "Clause 12A is not about discrimination. It's about environmental load management. Every new permanent occupant requires resources: water, noise limits, vehicular load. We must plan accordingly." She paused, her eyes skimming the crowd like she was waiting for applause. Silence. Then she pivoted. "With that in mind, the board will introduce Amendment 12A4, clarifying that all biological additions to households must be reported to the board within 30 days of arrival. Failure to do so may result in fines, occupancy assessment, or property review." There it was, a new rule retrofitted to justify the old abuse. A clause written to legalize what she'd already done. I stepped forward. "Point of inquiry," I said. Her eyes met mine without flinching. "Mr. Velrick, the floor will open after board business concludes." "Then I suggest you finish quickly." More murmurs. She sighed. "Very well. Let's move to resident questions. Please limit your comments to 90 seconds. I walked to the front, opened my folder, and laid out the photos one by one. Image 1, Eloise entering the hospital hallway without a badge. Image 2, the time-stamped corridor footage. Image 3, the falsified title printout, Municipal Community Liaison. Then I placed the lease clause on top of it all. Eloise's smile faltered. "This is not the venue," she started. "No," I said. "This is exactly the venue." I turned to face the room. Wickerdale isn't under attack from unregulated infants. It's under siege by a leadership that believes power is the same as law. My daughter was touched, held, by someone impersonating authority. That's not a misunderstanding. That's intrusion. Dennis looked like he wanted to melt through his seat. I raised the lease clause. "This document, signed by your own office, states medical privacy supersedes board policy. Eloise violated that, and then tried to rewrite the charter to cover it after the fact." More than murmurs now. Voices, agreement. A woman in the back raised her phone and started recording. "Just today," I continued, "I received confirmation from the Office of Civil Enforcement. A formal review has begun. State investigators will be auditing Wickerdale's administrative actions, your credentials, your policies, and your history of enforcement." Eloise tried to speak again, but the room wasn't with her anymore. "This is grandstanding," she snapped. "No," Carla said from the back, voice clear. "This is accountability." Jillian Poe closed her binder. The moment cracked. It didn't shatter, but it cracked. For the first time since we moved here, Eloise didn't look like the one holding the room together. She looked like the one trying to keep it from falling apart. The fallout didn't hit right away. That's not how power breaks. It splinters, slowly, quietly. The board meeting ended with no official vote, no signature, no gavel. Eloise simply stood and walked out, her expression unreadable, her binder zipped shut like a coffin lid. The room didn't follow her. They stayed seated, still, processing. I didn't speak to anyone afterward. I didn't need to. That was the point of the truth. When it lands right, it echoes without needing repetition. The next morning, I woke to 3 emails. The first was from Aileen Voss. We've officially opened a Title 17 compliance investigation. You are now designated as a primary material witness. Please preserve all documents and correspondence. We've also requested a freeze on any HOA enforcement actions from Wickerdale until our review concludes. The second was from a neighbor, Wallace Krinn. You don't know me, but I've been waiting for years for someone to stand up to her. Thank you. My wife cried watching you speak. We'll be at the next one. Tell us what you need. The third was unsigned, just 1 sentence. You should have left it alone. No threat, no name, no signature. But the timestamp matched a device located inside the Wickerdale admin office. I recognized the subnet. I'd mapped the neighborhood's digital infrastructure weeks ago, back when I still thought I'd have to fight in the dark. Now, I had light. Raisa didn't ask for details. She just watched me as I read the emails at the kitchen table, her hand resting lightly on our daughter's back as she slept curled on her chest. She won't go down without breaking something, Raisa said quietly. She already broke the rules, I replied. Now she has to live in the open with that. Later that afternoon, a city vehicle pulled up outside the Wickerdale office. It wasn't unmarked this time. The seal on the door said, Department of Administrative Oversight. The driver didn't get out right away. He sat there, engine running, eyes scanning the front of the building. Then he stepped out, walked up the path, and rang the bell. 2 minutes later, the door opened. It wasn't Eloise who answered. It was Dennis. He didn't smile. He didn't even look confused. He just let the man in and closed the door behind him. At 6:43 p.m., an internal HOA message was posted to all resident portals. Effective immediately, President Eloise Tarmond is recusing herself from enforcement operations pending administrative review. Compliance Officer Harbo will serve as interim liaison until further notice. No apology, no explanation, just distance. I sat with it for a while, staring at the screen, rereading the words, not because I didn't believe them, but because I'd never expected Wickerdale to admit anything at all. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was momentum. At 8 p.m., I received a final notice, this time from the HOA's legal advisor. All pending violations associated with Lot 47 have been suspended. No further occupancy assessments or property compliance actions will be initiated until after formal state review. Any past statements made by board members are considered non-binding commentary and not enforceable under HOA policy. Translation, they were backing off, fast. Trying to sweep the language under the rug before investigators arrived, I printed it, highlighted the key lines, added it to the file marked post-confrontation pullback. By morning, our mailbox flag was removed, the one they'd tagged red during the so-called ecological warning review. Gone, quietly, no acknowledgement. Eloise hadn't resigned, but she'd stepped back. The timing told me everything. She knew what was coming, the audit, the interviews, the legal consequences. But more than that, she knew something had changed. The neighborhood had seen her exposed, not yelled at, not outvoted, exposed, and no charter in the world could erase what the community now understood. The rules were never about protection. They were about obedience. And we were done obeying. I didn't expect the porch to feel different, but it did. The swing creaked under my weight, softer now, like it was finally allowed to just be a piece of wood and chain again. No longer a place where I sat counting every camera rotation, every HOA van drive-by, every envelope slipped under our door. That part of our lives had closed. 3 days after the board meeting, the Department of Civil Enforcement posted a public bulletin. Ongoing investigation into Wickerdale Edge Homeowners Association under Title 17 authority. Initial findings confirm procedural misconduct, misuse of positional access, and unauthorized policy enforcement in violation of state administrative code. Further review pending. It made the rounds. HOA forums, local news blogs, even reached a few law review threads. Residents started screenshotting it, sharing it. That's when the emails began. First from Lot 14, a couple who'd been fined for having their grandson's medical equipment on the porch overnight. Then Lot 21, an elderly man whose wife had been cited for non-conforming window tint. Each message came with the same phrase, somewhere near the end. I didn't know we were allowed to say no. That's what systems like Eloise's thrive on. Not law, not even fear, permission, the belief that we aren't allowed to question. But someone did. And when they saw the consequences land somewhere other than on the whistleblower, the air shifted. That afternoon, Sister Corvell stopped by. She didn't say much, just handed me a small manila envelope with her name scribbled across the top in pen. I'm transferring to St. Hesperia in Roanoke, she said, eyes soft. Different pace, less entangled. You sure that's what you want? I am, she said, but I needed you to have this. Inside was the original security log she'd copied, the one the hospital wiped. In case anyone tries to rewrite history, she said, you already made sure they can't. Her smile was quiet, tired, but real. As she walked down the steps, I realized how much her presence had mattered, not just to the investigation, but to the story itself. She wasn't a whistleblower. She was a mirror, proof that even people inside the system could break its spell. Later that night, Risa and I sat on the couch, our daughter asleep between us. Her breathing was steady now. No wheeze, just peace. I never told you, Risa said, her voice just above a whisper. The night it happened. When Eloise picked her up, I couldn't move. My body, it locked up. I kept thinking, is this how it starts? Not with sirens or alarms, but with a form, a rule, a woman in a blazer telling me it's policy. I didn't answer. I just reached for her hand and let the silence settle, because I'd felt the same thing. Not rage, not panic, just disbelief that it could go that far, that someone could twist power so tightly around a child and still believe it was just another enforcement decision. And now? Now the state was reviewing every charter clause. Eloise's authority was suspended pending final findings. Julia Malkin had voluntarily resigned from the hospital and disappeared from every HOA listing. Residents were organizing their own meeting, one not controlled by board scheduling or approvals. A vote to restructure the HOA was already in the works. The gates hadn't fallen, but they were rusting, and people had stopped pretending not to notice. And the swing, still there, still ours. A symbol not just of comfort, but of refusal. The thing they couldn't redact, couldn't fine, couldn't erase. If you're watching this, if you live in a place where rules have turned into weapons, where silence feels safer than truth, where compliance is demanded but never explained, don't wait for someone else to speak first, because you might be the only one who sees what's really happening, and once you speak, the rest will follow. Subscribe if you believe policy should protect, not punish. Because in neighborhoods like this, silence is never neutral.